Lady Abigail Wilkinson did not weep when she saw her husband lift his glass to another woman. She stood in the dark gallery above the ballroom, rainwater still clinging to the hem of her cloak, and watched the Duke of Wilkinson smile as though betrayal were a form of entertainment. Below, 200 candles blazed against crystal chandeliers. Below, Lady Yasmin Fitzgerald stood at Patrick's right hand in scarlet silk, her laughter rising above the strings. And below, in the very house where Abigail had given him her loyalty, her labor, and 5 years of her life, the Duke behaved as though he had no wife at all. In that instant, the danger was no longer his unfaithfulness. It was what Abigail carried pressed beneath her cloak-leather-bound ledger that could unmake him. She remained at the window only long enough to count 3 breaths, not to steady herself. That stage of her suffering had passed long ago. She counted because numbers had always served her better than tears. Then she turned from the music, from the golden light, from the sight of Patrick Wilkinson inclining his fair, handsome head toward Yasmin, as though the woman were a duchess already, and she went down the servants' stair with the silence of someone who had rehearsed her own disappearance. Outside, winter rain lashed the stone of Wilkinson Manor. The gardens were black with mud. The statues along the east terrace looked like ghosts in the storm. Abigail did not hesitate. The cipher book beneath her cloak seemed to burn against her ribs. Any gentleman in that ballroom would have thought it an ordinary ledger of state figures perhaps, or a tiresome military register. None of them would have guessed that every triumph attached to Patrick's name had first passed through her hands. Every dispatch, every treaty note, every calculation that had made the Duke feared in Parliament and admired by the War Office. For 5 years, while society called her quiet and unimpressive, Abigail had built the mind of Wilkinson power in a hidden room no guest knew existed, and tonight she had taken proof. If Patrick believed, as he always had, that his wife would endure anything rather than leave, the morning would teach him otherwise. 1 week earlier, Abigail had still been sitting behind the false wall in the east corridor, bent over military correspondence by candlelight while the rest of the manor slept. The room was scarcely larger than a dressing closet, yet it contained the true engine of Wilkinson authority. Maps pinned beneath brass tacks, coded reports stacked in neat columns, ledgers marked in her fine hand, and a narrow desk worn smooth where her wrists had rested night after night. A pot of tea had long since gone cold beside her elbow. She was studying a dispatch from Aldenmore, written in the cipher Patrick's officers praised as the Duke's most brilliant innovation. It was not his. Patrick had come to her in the second winter of their marriage in a rare state of agitation, carrying intercepted enemy letters, and the temper of a man unused to being thwarted. His code-breaker had taken ill. He needed the messages opened before dawn. Abigail, then still foolish enough to believe usefulness might earn tenderness, had worked until sunrise and done more than he asked. She had not merely solved the letters, she had rebuilt his entire encryption system, weaving mathematics, language patterns, and rotating keys into something nearly impossible to break. Patrick had carried that creation into his war council and accepted their admiration without once speaking her name. That had been the beginning. By the 5th year of their marriage, he no longer even pretended to remember where his brilliance originated. Abigail broke the Aldenmore report in less than an hour. The result was plain enough to her practiced eye. Troop movement along the Ridge Pass, a planned strike on the eastern watchtower, and a 72-hour window in which reinforcements must be sent or the duchy would lose the position entirely. She wrote the strategy in clear, elegant language. She sealed it. Before dawn, she slid it beneath the door of Patrick's private study. That evening, he repeated her conclusions at dinner as though they had risen from his own military genius. He sat at the head of the mahogany table in dark formal dress, medals glinting in the candlelight. Yasmin Fitzgerald occupied the place at his right that should have belonged by rank and decency alike to his Duchess. She wore gold that night, bright and excessive, with diamonds at her throat and satisfaction in every glance she cast down the table. Abigail sat at the far end in silver-gray silk, plain beside her by design. Patrick spoke of border strategy, supply vulnerabilities, and instinct. He touched the stem of his wine-glass with elegant fingers while the magistrate listened in admiration. Not once did he look toward his wife. At one point, Yasmin leaned toward the magistrate's lady and murmured, with just enough sweetness to sharpen the cruelty, "Her grace does so fade into her room. One hardly knows whether to greet her or hang her upon the wall." The lady gave an uneasy laugh. Patrick heard it. His mouth curved. That small, easy smile wounded more than the insult itself. Abigail lowered her eyes to her plate and continued her meal with perfect composure. She had learned that pain in great houses must be swallowed noiselessly if one wished to survive it, but survival had ceased to be her ambition. 3 days later, carrying a tea tray to the Duke's study, she paused outside the oak door and heard Lady Yasmin ask in a low, amused voice, "And once she is declared unwell, what is to be done with her?" Abigail stood still. Then Patrick answered, calm as winter steel, "Whitmore House. Quietly. Permanently." The tray did not shake in her hands. That was the moment her grief became a plan. Abigail did not enter the study. She stood in the corridor with the silver tray balanced in her hands and listened while her husband arranged the burial of her life with the cool efficiency he reserved for estate matters. Whitmore House. The name itself was enough. Everyone in society knew of it. A gracious name for an ungracious place, where inconvenient wives, grieving daughters, and aging aunts might be hidden behind medical language and locked doors. Yasmin gave a soft, thoughtful hum. "You are certain no one would question it?" Patrick's answer came without hesitation. "A lady who weeps in company avoids society, complains of headaches, and speaks too intensely on subjects beyond her sphere may be made to seem anything a physician is paid to describe." Abigail felt something inside her grow very still, not broken, finished. For years she had endured humiliation as one endures cold weather in winter by believing spring must eventually follow. Yet here was the truth at last. Patrick did not merely neglect her. He meant to erase her, and to do so with her own silence arranged against her. She turned before either voice could reach the door. Step by measured step, she carried the untouched tea back through the corridor, set it upon a marble console, and climbed to her hidden room. There she sat at her desk, folded her hands once to stop their trembling, and began to think. Not like a wounded wife, like a strategist. By midnight she had made a list, the cipher ledger in the Duke's safe, the Eastern Auxiliary Gate and its coded release, the hired carriage route north to the post road, the intermediary in vellum who had once written to her about rare books and hidden messages between the lines. She burned 2 letters, drafted 3 more, and committed every necessary timing to memory. Then, because rage without discipline was useless, she went downstairs the following afternoon and took her place in the drawing room as though nothing at all had altered. Patrick barely glanced at her. Yasmin smiled over her teacup with the serene triumph of a woman who believed the future had already been settled in her favor. Only Abigail understood that the future was indeed settled. It simply did not belong to them. And when the winter solstice ball arrived, with its chandeliers, its musicians, and its glittering lies, she would not be the woman led away in disgrace. She would be the woman who vanished first. The first shift came not from kindness, but from hesitation. It happened 3 nights before the solstice ball, in the long corridor outside the east wing, where the lamps burned low and the house seemed to hold its breath between hours. Abigail had just returned from her hidden room, her mind alight with numbers and escape routes, when she heard footsteps behind her. Measured. Familiar. Patrick. She did not turn immediately. For 5 years, she had trained herself not to seek him first. But tonight, he spoke her name. Abigail. The sound of it, unadorned, without impatience, made her pause. She turned slowly. He stood a few paces away, still in his evening coat, the gold of his buttons catching the dim light. There was something in his expression she had not seen in months. Not warmth, but attention. "I was told you've not been well," he said. It was the sort of sentence a husband might offer in public, a polished concern meant to be witnessed. But there was no audience here. Only silence, only shadow. Abigail inclined her head slightly. "I'm quite well, Your Grace." A flicker crossed his face at the formality. For a moment, he seemed as though he might say something more, something unscripted. Instead, he stepped closer. Too close. "You have been absent," he said, his voice lower now, even more than usual. Abigail felt the weight of the cipher book hidden in her chamber, the plans already set into motion, the knowledge that every word spoken now belonged to a life she was already leaving behind. "I have found it preferable," she replied quietly, "to be where I am not required." It was not defiance. It was truth. And it struck him. Patrick's jaw tightened. For the briefest moment, something like uncertainty passed through his gaze, as though he were encountering her not as furniture, not as background, but as something with shape and consequence. "You are my Duchess," he said. The words were firm, possessive, and yet hollow. Abigail held his gaze. "Am I?" The question landed between them like a fracture. For 5 years, she had never asked it aloud. Patrick's expression darkened, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous. Recognition. He looked at her as though recalculating, as though something in the arrangement he had long taken for granted had shifted without his permission. "You are," he said again, more quietly this time. But he did not sound certain. Silence stretched. Down the corridor, a clock struck the hour. Abigail lowered her eyes, not in submission, but in dismissal. "I wish you a pleasant evening, Your Grace." She stepped past him, and for the first time in their marriage, he did not stop her. But he did turn. His gaze followed her retreating figure down the corridor, not with indifference, but with a focus that had come too late. Because in that moment, something inside Patrick Wilkinson altered, not enough to save what he had broken, but enough to make him feel, if only faintly, that he was about to lose something he did not yet understand. And Abigail knew it. She did not look back, but she felt it. The shift, the hesitation, the beginning of his awareness. It changed nothing, because by the time a man begins to notice the woman he has ignored, she has already learned how to disappear. The truth did not arrive all at once. It revealed itself in pieces, quiet, deliberate, and impossible to ignore once seen. On the morning of the solstice ball, Abigail was summoned, not by her husband, but by Mrs. Ellsworth, the housekeeper, whose composure rarely faltered. "Your Grace," she said softly, "a letter has arrived. It bears no seal." Abigail took it without comment. Unsealed letters were unusual in great houses. They suggested either urgency or secrecy. She returned to her chamber and closed the door. Inside was a single folded page. No greeting, no name, only a line written in a hand she did not recognize. "If you remain tonight, you will not leave at all." Abigail read it twice. Then once more. There was no threat in the wording, no embellishment, only certainty. She did not ask who had sent it. She already knew enough. Whitmore House. The physician. The plan spoken so calmly behind the study door. This was not a warning born of kindness. It was a confirmation. For a long moment, Abigail stood by the window, the winter light pale across her hands, the letter trembling only slightly between her fingers. Then she folded it once, twice, and placed it into the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished without a trace. So would she. That afternoon, the manor transformed. Servants moved like shadows through corridors, polishing silver, lighting candles, arranging flowers in towering vases that would wilt by morning. Musicians arrived. Carriages lined the gravel drive, and Abigail dressed as she always did. Gray silk, high neckline, no jewels, invisible. Her maid hesitated while fastening the final button. "Your Grace, shall I bring something brighter this evening?" Abigail met her reflection. No, because tonight she did not need to be seen. She needed to be forgotten. By 9 o'clock, the ballroom blazed with light. Laughter filled the air. Crystal chimed. Silk whispered across marble floors. Patrick stood at the center of it all, commanding attention with effortless charm, his voice carrying over the music as though the room itself had been built to amplify him. Yasmin Fitzgerald remained at his side, scarlet, radiant, victorious, to every watching eye, the future Duchess of Wilkinson. Abigail entered only briefly, 4 minutes, long enough to greet the magistrate's wife, long enough to be witnessed, long enough to establish that she had been present. Then she pressed a hand lightly to her temple. "A headache," she murmured. No one questioned it. No one ever did. She turned. She left the light. And no one noticed that she did not return. Upstairs, the corridors were dim and quiet, the distant music fading with every step she took. She did not go to her chamber. She went to his. Patrick's private study stood at the end of the east wing, exactly where it always had, guarded not by locks, but by assumption. No one entered without invitation, except the woman who had spent 5 years correcting what he never understood. Abigail stepped inside. No candle, No hesitation. She moved through the darkness with certainty, her hands brushing past familiar edges, desk, chair, shelves, until she reached the portrait on the wall. His father, watching, judging. She slid it aside. The safe waited behind it. 6-point mechanism. A system Patrick believed secret. A system she had memorized long ago. Her fingers turned the dial. 1 click. 2. 3. The storm outside struck the windows, masking the soft alignment of metal within. The lock released. The safe opened. Inside lay everything that mattered. Correspondence bound in black ribbon, documents of quiet coercion. And at the center, the Wilkinson cipher. The truth of his power. The truth of her invisibility. Abigail reached for it. Her hands did not tremble, because this was not theft. This was reclamation. From within her cloak, she withdrew the replacement, a perfect imitation, crafted with patient care, filled with meaningless figures. On its first page, written in a hand deliberately altered, she had left him 2 words. A farewell. A verdict. She placed the false ledger inside, closed the safe, returned the portrait, and stood for a single moment in the silence, listening. The music below. The rain beyond the glass. The life she was leaving behind. Then she pressed the real cipher to her chest and walked away. The rain had not softened. It came harder, now relentless against the stone, drumming through the gardens, swallowing every careless sound that might betray her escape. Abigail stepped into it without hesitation. The cold struck instantly, soaking through silk and cloak alike, but she did not slow. The path along the kitchen garden had already turned to mud, pulling at her steps, yet she moved with quiet precision. The cipher held firm against her ribs. Behind her, the ballroom still burned with light, music, laughter, applause, a life that had never truly belonged to her. For one brief moment, just one, the thought came unbidden. 5 years. 5 years of mornings spent writing words he would speak. 5 years of watching him become something the world admired, while she remained unseen. 5 years of believing foolishly that usefulness might one day become affection. Her breath caught, not with grief, with something sharper. Because the worst of it was not that he had betrayed her, it was that he had never believed she could leave. Abigail stopped beneath the shadow of the eastern wall. The iron gate loomed ahead, half hidden in darkness. 2 guards stood beneath the overhang, their voices low, careless, untouched by the storm that seemed determined to wash everything else away. She could hear them laughing, the ordinary ease of men who believed the world was exactly as it appeared. For a moment only, a moment, Abigail closed her eyes, not in fear, in calculation, timing, distance, sound. She had written the very code that governed this gate. She knew it better than the men assigned to guard it. Still, if she failed now, Whitmore House. A locked door. A life erased. Her fingers tightened around the cipher. No, she would not be contained. She stepped forward, silent against the grass, avoiding the gravel where sound would carry. The mechanism panel sat recessed in the stone. She opened it by touch. The metal was cold beneath her fingers. Behind her, 1 guard shifted. A boot scraped. Abigail stilled. The rainmaster breathing, the voices resumed. A complaint about the weather. A laugh. Nothing more. Slowly, carefully, she entered the sequence. Each movement exact. Each position memorized. The final lever clicked. The gate released with a soft, obedient sound. Abigail pushed it open just enough to pass through. No more. Never more than necessary. She slipped beyond the wall, and just like that, she was no longer the Duchess of Wilkinson. The forest swallowed her. Dark branches above, uneven ground below, rain falling in sheets that blurred the path into nothing. She did not light the lamp hidden in her pocket. Light could be followed. She walked by memory alone, 3 miles north. The post road, the carriage, freedom. Her steps faltered once, only once, when the weight of what she carried shifted beneath her cloak. Not just the cipher, not just proof, but everything Patrick had never understood. The mind, the strategy, the quiet power he had mistaken for absence. He would wake tomorrow believing he had been abandoned. He would not yet understand that he had been undone. Behind her, in a house filled with light and music, Patrick Wilkinson raised his glass once more. Yasmin stood beside him, radiant and scarlet, her hand brushing his sleeve as though she already belonged there. He smiled. He laughed. He did not notice the absence. Not yet. But somewhere beneath the surface, beneath the charm, the confidence, the performance, something shifted. A faint, unfamiliar unease. The kind a man feels when something essential has moved, and he cannot yet name what. He turned his head slightly, as though searching for something he did not consciously miss. Then Yasmin spoke, and the moment passed. Miles away, Abigail reached the road. A single carriage waited in the darkness, just as arranged. No crest, no questions. The driver did not look at her face, only at the coin she placed in his hand. She stepped inside, closed the door, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself to breathe. Not relief, not yet, but something close. The carriage jolted forward, the manor disappeared into the storm, and Abigail Bentley, wife, Duchess, ghost within her own life, vanished into the night with his greatest secret. By morning the storm had passed. Wilkinson Manor stood in a washed, colorless light, too still, too quiet, as though something within its walls had shifted during the night and left an absence no servant could name. Patrick woke late. The remnants of brandy lingered at the edge of his thoughts, as he dressed with practiced indifference, ignoring the faint irritation that had followed him since dawn. Something was wrong. He could feel it, not sharply, not yet, but like a misstep in a familiar room. He entered the dining chamber. Breakfast was laid precisely. Silver gleamed, coffee steamed, everything exactly as it should be. And yet, he paused. Where is the Duchess? The question left his mouth before he considered it. Mrs. Ellsworth inclined her head, composed as ever. Her Grace has not yet come down, Your Grace. Patrick frowned slightly. Annoyance, nothing more. She has been unwell, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. See that she is attended. Yes, Your Grace. He sat, ate, drank. But the unease did not leave him. It grew. Subtle at first, then sharper. By the time he rose from a table, he no longer ignored it. He went to the study. There was no letter waiting, no neatly written analysis placed where it always was. Patrick stood at his desk staring at the empty surface. For 5 years, he had begun his mornings this way, reading conclusions already formed, solutions already crafted, certainty already prepared. He had never questioned it, never wondered. Now there was nothing. A slow, unfamiliar tension crept into his chest. He turned toward the portrait, moved it aside, opened the safe. The ledger was there, exactly where it should be. And yet the moment he touched it, something felt wrong. The weight, the texture, the silence. Patrick opened it. Numbers, columns, meaningless. His breath stilled. He flipped pages faster, faster. Nothing, no pattern, no clarity, no intelligence, only emptiness disguised as structure. Then, the first page. 2 words. I quit. The sound that left him was not controlled. It was raw, instinctive. He turned, moving before thought could catch up. The study door striking the wall as he crossed the corridor in long, urgent strides. Ellsworth! His voice cut through the house. Servants froze. Footsteps echoed. Where is the Duchess? Mrs. Ellsworth appeared at once, her composure intact, but her eyes sharper now. Her Grace's bed was unslept in, Your Grace. Her maid reports that several items are missing. Patrick stared at her. The words did not land. They refused to. She has gone out, he said, dismissing it. Send for her. A pause. Then carefully, no carriage was taken, Your Grace. Silence. Something broke. Not loudly, not visibly, but completely. Patrick turned and struck the wall with his fist, the impact echoing down the corridor, plaster cracking beneath his knuckles. He did not seem to feel it, because for the first time, he understood nothing. Not the cipher, not the safe, not the disappearance, not the woman he had lived beside for 5 years. The realization came slowly, brutally. He did not know how to find her, He did not know how to replace her. He did not even know how to begin the day without her work lay before him. The Duke of Wilkinson feared, admired, unquestioned, stood in his own house, and had no idea what to do next. Miles away, beneath a pale morning sky, Abigail sat in a quiet room in a city that did not know her name. The cipher rested on the table before her. For the first time, it was not hidden, not borrowed, not used in silence. It was hers. A servant knocked lightly. "Your appointment awaits, madam." Abigail rose. She adjusted her gloves, and for a brief moment, only a moment, she allowed herself to feel it. Not triumph, not yet, but something steady, something earned. She stepped toward the door, toward the woman who held power enough to protect her or destroy her. Because freedom, she knew now, was only the beginning. The tent stood alone in the meadow. No banners, no ornament, only pale canvas drawn tight against the autumn wind and two worlds waiting on either side of it. Patrick Wilkinson arrived first. He wore his full military regalia, every metal polished, every line of his coat precise. It was armor of a different kind, authority, stitched into fabric, confidence worn like inheritance, but beneath it, there was strain. 6 months had carved it into him. The loss of Aldenmore, the whispers in Parliament, the silence at his own dinner table, and the knowledge quiet, constant, that every failure traced back to a single absence. Hers. He took his seat, arranged his papers, waited. Then, footsteps, not hurried, not uncertain, measured, familiar. Patrick's gaze lifted, and for the first time since the night she vanished, he saw her. Abigail entered without announcement. No gray, no quiet retreat. Midnight blue wrapped her like intention, deep and deliberate. Her hair was no longer pinned into submission but shaped with care. There was no hesitation in her posture, no trace of the woman who once lowered her gaze to avoid notice. She did not avoid him now. She walked directly across the tent and took her place opposite him, equal, untouched, unreachable. Between them, she placed the cipher. Not hidden, not guarded, offered. The room stilled. Patrick looked at the book, then at her, and something in his expression, something long buried beneath pride and performance, finally surfaced. Understanding. Too late. Abigail. Her name left him quieter than it ever had before, not a command, not a dismissal. A request. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now, stripped of the charm he once used so easily. "Come home." The words hung between them. Simple, dangerous, empty. "I see it now," he continued, the control in his tone tightening. "Everything I failed to see before. The work. The mind behind it. The duchy is—" He stopped, recalibrating, "failing without you." There it was. Truth. But not the kind that heals. The kind that reveals. Abigail watched him without interruption, without reaction. For 5 years, she had imagined what this moment might feel like. His attention, his acknowledgement, his need. She felt none of it. Only clarity. "You do not need me," she said quietly. Her voice did not rise. It did not tremble. It simply ended the illusion. "You need what I gave you." Patrick's jaw tightened. "That is the same thing." "No," she replied, her gaze steady. "It never was." Silence pressed in. He reached for the cipher, opening it, turning a page at random, numbers, symbols, meaning just beyond his grasp. For the first time, he did not pretend to understand. He looked up. There was something raw in it now, something unguarded. Was any of it real? The question slipped out before he could reshape it. Not strategy, not power. Something human, something too late. Abigail held his gaze. "The work was real," she said. "Every word measured, every truth deliberate, every dispatch, every decision. Every morning, I placed the answer in your hands before you woke." A breath. Then, what you chose to see was not. It landed clean, final. She closed the document case, rose. The negotiation terms were already written, already agreed, already inevitable. He would sign them. The duchy would diminish. His name would remain. But it would never mean what it once had, because he would always know it had never truly been his. Patrick did not stop her. He could not, because for the first time in his life, he had nothing to offer that she needed. Abigail turned, stepped out into the cold autumn air. The wind caught the edge of her cloak, but she did not pause. Behind her, the man who had once held everything stood with empty hands. Ahead, a future that belonged entirely to her. She did not look back, not out of pride, but because there was nothing left to calculate, nothing left to reclaim, nothing left to lose. Only forward, only her name, only the quiet, powerful truth she had always known, that the woman they never noticed was the one who had built everything, and the one who walked away with it.